Congratulations, you've been chosen to teach summer school.
Be quiet and pay attention.
We can't learn our ways.
Oh, I'm not a real teacher.
I have had it with this school, Skinner.
That's all right. These aren't real students, though.
Hello and welcome back to the Dune Minute Podcast, your place to dive deep, topic by topic, into the world of Dune. I'm one of your hosts, Zach.
And I'm John.
And today we are joined by a super special guest for us. Going to be instrumental in this topic because John and I are fucking idiots. So I would love to introduce CHOAM director from Blue Sky.
Everyone's favorite economist.
Yes.
That's right. I don't get enough economics content in there. Mostly shit posts, but occasionally some.
I mean, that's what the internet's for, right? Is just shit posting. So,
man, we are so pleased to have you on the show. Our topic today is CHOAM, and we could have no better guest than the director themselves, the CHOAM director.
The director, not just a director, because there's a whole directorship board of directors, but I'm
oh, and we will get into all of that.
Yeah, some directors are more equal than others.
So, man, just to start off a little bit, I'd love to give just a little bit of backstory, whatever you feel like willing to share into your fandom of Dune and kind of how that intersects with economics, which is kind of the broader topic that we're here to talk about.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. You know, I when I was a kid, I actually didn't read the Dune books. I read just overviews. So basically like the equivalent of reading Dune Wiki nowadays. So I only really had as much knowledge on Dune as, say, Elon Musk does nowadays. So
So not a lot.
Not a lot. No, not a lot. So I read those when I was maybe early teenager. And then finally, when I was in the university undergrad, I started to read the books, and it just blew my mind way more than any, the overviews don't do any justice to the actual prose and the different concepts. And especially since I love economics, and I have ever since, I'd say around high school, this was it just dovetailed into all my interests, especially since I'm not just a straight economist, I like a lot of political science, philosophy.
Sure.
So these all, obviously Dune is replete with all of those. So much so that, the whole political system and economic system, the whole political economic system is designed for, this neo-feudal governance. And that particularly fascinated me. Why in 10,000 years in the future, governments seem to have regressed. And especially given, I'm sure you're familiar with, Francis Fukuyama and a lot of the different dialectical materialism that he brings in, and how basically his analysis is that, democracy is kind of the end state where it resolves all of the different tensions between different groups and whatnot. So how did we go back? How did we regress into neo-feudal society? And that's what kind of was the prism through which I started to get really interested in Dune. And it did help, obviously, that there were a lot of anthropology. I found the Fremen water anthropology to be fascinating, too. There's a lot of little experiences that take you on, Frank takes you on a ride. But the economic core is what I loved.
Yeah, just the like you talk about CHOAM and you talk about the Guild and the Bene Gesserit and the Landsraad and like all these like the different, I'll put them under the umbrella of the governing bodies in the universe. They're so interconnected, even though they try not to be.
Yeah.
Or at least on the surface, they try not to be.
They try not to be. But if you scratch the surface of CHOAM, you see that it really is pretty much synonymous with the Guild. And frankly, that's where all the power lies. We'll get into that in a second, I'm sure. But yeah, I do think it's interesting how Frank Herbert, despite having no economics education, he really nails a lot of concepts. He nails, for instance, the cartels and how they would work, how they would function, the Great Convention, a lot of these different aspects of economics that we study, he nailed in the 60s. I mean, apart from, nailing AI, the rise of corporatist neo-feudalism that we seem to be going in that direction right now, he was pretty prescient.
Makes me curious if he just had a buddy that was an economist that he just kind of ran some things past and was just like, hey, does this make sense?
Oh, I'm sure he did.
No, fine.
Yeah, I'm sure he did, since he was a journalist. As a journalist, you're cultivating all sorts of sources. And I'm sure he had an economist and different subject matter experts. He certainly had, some kind of botanist or, I don't know, planetologist, climatologist, something.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
I don't mean to brag, but I know how to do my taxes with a W-2 and the 1099 that I get from my interest from my bank. So
Yeah,
I'm somewhat of an economist myself.
Yeah.
So you're more economically literate than Elon Musk at this point. So that's good. Yeah.
What do you say we dive into this world, because I feel like it's going to be this is going to be a really dense topic, and I'm super excited to get into it. So I think we should go back. I think a good starting point, and y'all correct me if you disagree, but a good starting point is to go back to zero AG, the B. So the BG AG crossover. Our last episode was on the Spacing Guild, where we talked about kind of the how or at least a topic that we talked about was the calendar switchover in the Dune universe, and how important that was. During that switchover, CHOAM was not something that existed at that point.
The changing of the G's.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was something that kind of came, a few years later. So I'd love to talk about a little bit, just kind of what the landscape of trade in the universe, or in the Dune universe, was before CHOAM took over.
Yeah, I think that's the best starting point, because first of all, it's the most analogous to our world. And so it's kind of gives us a good transition and a good segue, where we're not just jumping in 10,000 years in the future. We can see the progression and the trajectory of all this stuff. And so we see right now, we can kind of see how artificial intelligence, computing power, they're all enabling different types. These technologies are enabling particularly fast communications and transportation. And so that was the key for interstellar trade before the Guild, before the Butlerian Jihad, was fast, reliable, accessible transportation and communications. So
yeah, I think that accessible point is one that's super important.
I was going to say that was definitely something that we talked about too, even so far back in our Butlerian Jihad episode, but definitely more in our Spacing Guild, was prior to the Butlerian Jihad, people are, going back and forth all over the place. And then you have the Jihad, and then we go back to the completely isolated systems in space that the Guild reconnects later on. And in doing so, reconnects commerce.
And this CHOAM history will overlap with the Guild history, because in my mind, at least, the two are fundamentally connected. I mean, they share headquarters, their planet in Tupile. They're really very connected. CHOAM is kind of the intermediary between the great houses and the Guild, but really the power comes from the Guild. Anyway, I think that the accessible part is very important, because not only accessible in terms of expense, but also just the ability to access the service whatsoever. So it was not easy, as it became after the Butlerian Jihad. It was not easy to exclude commerce from these different arteries of trade. You couldn't possibly try to corner transportation and commercial, transportation and commerce in the Imperium. It would not have been possible, if only because any monopoly, they could have sidestepped any monopoly competition, could have, by just starting up their own interstellar commercial company, their transport company, and they could pretty much circumvent any type of cornering of the market. So you see a lot of accessibility, it's cheap. Navigational power is cheap. I'm sure the computing power by this point had become very cheap, Moore's Law and whatnot. So you see, kind of an orgy of different of transportation, of travel, tourism, commerce. And then you have the Butlerian Jihad, which Actually, I mean,
that little thing.
That little thing. I mean, it was just a little stutter step in our technological development. But the Dune Encyclopedia, it points to some of the transportation companies that have been operating pre-jihad. Those were kind of the first targets, according to the encyclopedia, at least.
I think they mentioned Transcom as one a number of times.
Yeah, and we've talked about Transcom a couple times.
Yeah,
with their
that seems to be like the go-to example that the encyclopedia uses.
Yeah. So people go in, the Luddites start smashing up Transcom and all of their. I don't know exactly what their fabs for ships. I don't know we don't know. This is kind of speculative, and it's in the encyclopedia, but we don't really know what their competitive advantage was. But we certainly know that there was no monopoly on trade. And so when the jihad comes along and destroys all of this technology, you could make an argument that it really is, that's kind of the wellspring from which the neo-feudal order comes, because now once you destroy the computers, once you destroy navigational equipment like that, communication, transportation become extremely expensive. And that was the defining feature of the Middle Age economy, was extremely high transportation costs. You had a breakdown of, the Roman network of roads and different trade patterns, Silk Road and whatnot. And that created the conditions under which these feudal governments could carve out their little fiefs, and eventually they would coalesce into some type of Holy Roman Empire, or in this case, an imperium. So I'm getting ahead of myself here, but this is kind of where all of this is going. At first it seems like the Butlerian Jihad is kind of a devolution of power back to the people. But really, at least economically, it creates the perfect conditions for an interstellar monopoly. And so now you have...
It opened up the landscape for like a consolidation more than anything.
Right. Yeah. It would not have been possible. And this entire political economic system would not have been possible if there's abundant and cheap transportation. The whole thing would fall. Right. So in a way, you could say that the guild, the emperor, all the post-Butlerian Jihad society, they all have a strong incentive to keep a lid on spacefaring technology and to prevent its development, basically.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, we've got Transcom. That's supposedly the epicenter, or at least the flashpoint that begins the Butlerian Jihad. You see a systematic destruction of navigational equipment, the computers that were important for communications and that were also important for navigating through the Holtzman effect. And so then you see, at least in the encyclopedia, and I should mention that none of the books really refer to the establishment and foundation of CHOAM. In fact, we only really get oblique references, which is kind of Herbert's style, but...
That's very much Herbert's style, yes.
What is it in the first book? It's like Leto says something to the extent of CHOAM just transports like sharks and dung and
whale and pundi rice.
And like that's it. That's all they do.
And because of that, they're the most important economic entity in the Imperium, of course.
Hey, that rice is important.
Yeah, they do have the most bizarre. Whenever they list the products of CHOAM, they always go for the weirdest ones. It's always that. It's like, what is it? Ink vines, Tlaxu eyes. It's never like, they transport chickens, beef to different planets, stuff like that.
Well, Leto says whale fur, but if he only knew what the Harkonnens actually sold, the whale cum. There was probably a whole section just dedicated to whale sperm.
Yeah, I did my master's at an agricultural school, and you would walk by and just randomly see advertisements for bull semen in the hallways and stuff. I do feel like that at some point. Yeah, like Baron Harkonnen trying to sell me some whale sperm.
Well, that's like, you know, Glock, the firearms manufacturer, also sells horse insemination kits, and they apparently make a shitload of money from those for like racing horses and stuff. Yeah. The more you know.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, CHOAM is like that too, and then you have the conglomerate of random different businesses, you know. It's necessarily that way.
And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I mean, they don't really care as long as you can pay for it. I mean, whatever, they'll move it from A to B.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
the guild will move it. The guild will move it from A to B. CHOAM deals with everything. You know, if it's a commodity, they got it.
Yeah, I should say though that they wouldn't necessarily deal in everything. Well, at least we don't know. You know, like for instance, do they deal in armaments? We don't really know much about that.
I'm sure you could pay them enough and they would deal in it.
Yeah, I would think so. You know, we know that the guild will take bribes to transport military equipment, but we don't really know if CHOAM is involved in that industry. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not saying you know they touch everything. It's their tendrils are in every industry, but we just don't have explicit references.
So I want to get us kind of progressing through the history of the development of CHOAM. We have the Krinos take power, and we have I guess the next big event in CHOAM history is the Great Financial Synod. Synod? I don't know how to actually say that word. I think it's synod.
I think it's synod, but
I go with synod in my head. I don't know.
Okay, cool. Okay, we'll go with synod here then. So we have the Great Financial Synod, which is really at least as I understand it, where CHOAM has its like solid foundations.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Constitutional Convention for the Imperium, CHOAM, the Guild, Landgrad. Yeah, that out of that comes all of these different structures.
Yeah, it was a 2-year meeting.
Yeah.
Dude, I hate 30-minute phone calls at work. I can't imagine being stuck in a Zoom call for 2 years.
Well, how long did it take to write the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? I think those took a couple months at least. So, you could reason that for an imperium that spans, thousands of worlds, you'd probably need
that's fair.
A couple of years to hammer that out. But the key was in all of this synod was the Dune Encyclopedia points to the emperor as kind of the person pulling the strings behind all of this. But in my mind, it's the guild really that's behind it. You know, the emperor is making moves and pulling strings, but really it's the guild that's pushing all of this.
Because they didn't necessarily want to be the transportation or the wings of the Imperium, as they like to call it, and the economic engine.
Yeah, or political. They basically said, and this is that's important to understand for the distinction between CHOAM and the guild, and why there even needs to be a distinction at all. Is because the guild pretty much says we don't want to get involved in politics, we don't want to get involved in commerce, we just want to sit and ply ourselves with spice all day. Yeah.
Well, they want to get involved in commerce in so much that they just want to make money from moving things, but they don't care about all of the other economics of the Imperium.
Right. Moreover, they recognize that they couldn't, they're a bunch of fishoid humans, so they really wouldn't be able to become emperor and command the loyalty of all these subjects. Being a merchant for CHOAM might also present some difficulties. I just think that in the end, the defining feature of the guild is that limitation of saying they say we're pragmatic or we're practical, and we decide not to involve ourselves in politics or economics or any of those realms. So that's why CHOAM exists, basically.
And I think that was a smart move on their part. That's you keep the boundaries where they need to be.
Yeah. They
can still influence CHOAM, and clearly they do, but they don't have to be involved in the minutia of everything.
Right. Well, and they just fundamentally have learned the wisdom of you get a certain point of wealth, you're supposed to go relax and enjoy yourself, not get involved in politics. So,
right.
I think it's also fair, too, to the guild that the less involved they are, the less they have to worry about the potential true meaning of what spice actually does for them. You know, because that was one of the things we talked about in our guild episode, was just how like crazy the guild very early on went to be secretive and secure about their information and everything. So, you know, as you're bound to grow more and more in presence, you know, generally speaking, are more under the microscope of all other people. And then people start, you know, poking their heads in places where maybe they shouldn't be. And then suddenly your secret sauce is gone. You know, not to make too local of a reference, but that would be basically the equivalent of when that one guy stole the Coca-Cola recipe and went to Pepsi and said, "Hey, I have it." And Pepsi was like, "Nah, we're calling the FBI."
Yeah, no, that's certainly to avoid scrutiny. I agree.
Yeah.
They require that. I've never quite understood the need for secrecy vis-a-vis the spice and its navigation enhancing, you know, spice strands. I mean, I get it. I get that the guild is worried that could be used as leverage against them. People could cut off the spice and they would die. So that's pretty good leverage. But I still I don't get it as much as, you know, I can't put myself in their shoes and understand why it would be completely their mission, you know, their mission in life to maintain this secret. But the secrecy obviously has a lot to do with how the guild operates and what they.
Yeah.
I think the secrecy is what allowed them to maintain that monopoly on transport.
Right.
So
yeah, and if you want to think about like the simplest answer is like, if people know about it, other people could do it.
yeah, and they'll do it for cheaper. There will always be someone that can do it for cheaper. Whether or not it's better, different story.
Yeah, I'm actually looking it up right now, and they say, I remember this now in the Dune Encyclopedia, they say their ability to guide ships through interstellar hyperspace lay not only in learning, but also in a secret. Certainly one needed to be a trained navigator, but the essence of their abilities lay in the spice trance. If one learned the secret of the spice trance, one learned what the guild knew. So in theory, yeah, I still don't quite understand that because, all right, so you know, first of all, mentats are not the same as guild navigators. There's something more that you need to navigate. It's more than just a math calculation. And so I don't really understand how, if you just go into a spice trance, you could possibly be a navigator. But that's what the encyclopedia says, and it could, you know, it makes a lot more sense than to have a natural monopoly. It makes more sense that it's an artificial monopoly.
Right. Yeah, as I understand it, it's like they get high on the spice enough to gain that little bit of prescience.
Yeah.
And that's what separates them from other like spice users. I'm sure that's a very simplistic interpretation of everything, but that's just how I understand it.
Someone on Blue Sky or someone's going to just email us a very angry.
I can hear the mechanical keyboards typing now.
Hey, fuck you. I love my mechanical keyboards.
I do think, sorry, but I did want to go back there because there is more than just the ability, or more than just the motivation to avoid scrutiny. There's also the fact that the CHOAM is it's the way of co-opting the great houses into the guild's economic sphere. So if the guild were to be CHOAM and the guild together, it would not be an acceptable situation. It would not have held together the Imperium. The only way the Imperium is held together is through bringing in, including the great houses, bringing them into the fold, having them compete against each other so that there's a multipolarity that helps to prevent any one house from gaining a hegemony over the others, but also makes it very profitable for them to keep the system going and not rebel at all. So
yeah, and I think that's a good point. I mean, I would love to talk a little bit about like what came out of the synod. So after this, 2.5, 3 year meeting that everyone had, we're left with this organization, CHOAM. Which, John, do you want to take a stab at the name?
Absolutely, the Combine Hanet Ober Advancer Mercantiles.
Love it, great name.
Don't ask me what it means. I have no fucking.
Well, so funny enough, when we were doing our research and everything for the episode, we found a Stack Overflow article, which I think is the most appropriate place for any kind of CHOAM discussion. Or sorry, it was a Stack Exchange. It wasn't a Stack Overflow. But someone asks, basically, what the hell does all of this mean? And I want to give credit to the person that gave this answer. DBK on AH2, but it's AHCH-TO.
This 7-year-old post on Stack Exchange.
2012.
Okay, longer than that. Okay.
Yeah. So Combine, I think you can, kind of.
If you're an English-speaking person, you can reason that that is a combination.
Yes. Honnête apparently comes from Middle French or Late Latin with a root for, basically honest or honorable. Ober comes from Old German, which translated to super or very or upper, which makes sense. Ober, Uber. Yeah. Advancer, you want to take a guess?
Advancement.
Yeah. And then mercantiles, it's a difficult one, but merchants.
Okay. So the combination of honorable,
super merchants,
merchants.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I dig it. Yeah. Hereforth known just as CHOAM. We're not going to say that name every single time.
No.
Frank was such he loved combining languages and stuff. So I think that's just a perfect example of just the amalgamation of, human languages that exist, 30 something thousand years into the future.
I want to say it was very early on. It was episode late teens, early 20s of season 1, talking about the movie, when we talked about Galak and we talked about how it was just a combination of Proto-Indo-European and also Slavic languages, and Frank had just kind of made weird Germanic sounding words for everything. Clearly he's pulling from a very, Eurocentric influence for CHOAM's naming here. So
I did mean to get into Galak a little bit later, because it is important. The common language that seems to be the standard or the official language in the Imperium, that's fairly important for economic unity and political unity within the Imperium. And we can kind of infer that there is a class system that involves, obviously there's classes in the Frafraluch, but we can infer also that language is an important part of that class system, just as it is in the United Kingdom, for instance, where you can tell people's social class. We could also infer that it's kind of the same thing with Galak. Certainly someone that speaks Chicopes or any of the other marginalized languages would be singled out as someone who's not important in the Imperium. So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I wanted to say you brought up Chicopsa and, the marginalized languages. It's interesting that the governing bodies are all, named after those, I'll say it. I mean, white people, basically white people. They have, the names derive from those languages, and everything else is, considered in a quote unquote marginalized language in the books. So, I mean, there's a clear distinction in the narrative.
Yeah, and that
you mean Harkonnen isn't Southeast Asian?
I don't know what the fuck Harkonnen is, man.
We talked about it. It came from, I think, Finnish.
East Asian. I don't know.
Oh, fair. Okay.
It's because it's Finnish or whatever, right? That's where you got it from. You looked it up in a phone book, right?
Yeah, it was Finnish.
Soviet. Well, that whole, this is a good point to talk about how do you guys say Faufreluches? I say it like that because it's easier.
Exactly like that. Yeah, that's exactly how I said it. Yeah.
I say it like that so I can remember how to spell it. Faufreluches. All right. So
this is so much of Dune is words that I've only read and never spoken. So I just have weird pronunciations in my head.
I don't know if you listened to our guild episode, but I made Zach try and say the guild
motto.
Yeah, without spice, there is no guild. Without guild, there is no spice. But in the original language, and man, it was fun to watch him just struggle sounding everything out for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that file for luchas, that is born in this financial synod. That out of that comes the whole class system. It's important to understand that CHOAM would not exist in a free marketplace if there was a competitive market, lots of sellers, lots of buyers, transportation costs are fairly low. You would not see CHOAM or any type of monopoly, at least not without some type of dynamic strategy, undercutting the price, driving out other suppliers, and then cornering the market. You might see some of that, but in general, unless the competitive landscape somehow changes significantly, a competitive market would never give rise to something like CHOAM. CHOAM is an artificial entity that is really it's designed only as a tool of the Imperium and the different power structures that they want to establish there. And so in that synod, you've got the Emperor, you got the Guild, the great houses. I don't assume that the houses minor were included in that, but probably all the major houses, the ones that have the atomics and are economically important, and the Bene Gesserit in there. And so out of that, they create a corporation, basically. I mean, that's what it is. It has a corporate form. It would be equivalent to like a closed corporation in our current, it would be a C Corp. So it's got shareholders. The shareholders were defined to be the great houses that had a certain threshold of commerce, of interplanetary commerce. And that interplanetary commerce, I should say, is at this point, before the Guild, is kind of just caravan routes. At least that's what the encyclopedia says, where you have these established routes and they would just send proto highliners on those routes, and it would take years to get around. So once you have the Guild established, you have faster transportation. That opens up all of this interplanetary commerce, and that's why you need CHOAM in the Guild, is because they can't have a free market. It would be too destabilizing. You would not. The Emperor and the great houses, they wanted to create a system that was stable, that would create massive incentives for the ruling classes to perpetuate the system. And so you would not, if you had a cheap way of conducting commerce between planets, you could see great houses rise in prominence, become richer, disrupt the existing economic order, cause dislocations in the different markets. Certain great houses might fall, might lose their position due to competition. All of these things were completely unacceptable to the Emperor and all the great houses that were in this synod. So they all determined that they ought to make a system that would completely artificially control commerce and so freeze any social progress in the Imperium. Because that's how you get a lot of progress, is through economics, at least in the Dune. That's a theme in the Dune books, is that a great house can come to prominence through wise and savvy commercial decisions, just like the Harkonnens did.
Yeah. Well, I want to touch on that because I think that's a really interesting concept, how CHOAM led, or at least contributed to, the stagnation that Paul was, so against, or just in Paul Leto too. I think we can get to that in a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about like how does one of the great houses become a director in CHOAM? Like there's you mentioned there are thresholds that they have to meet, and I think those are trade thresholds.
Yeah. I have the Dune Encyclopedia up in front of me, and it specifically says membership on the board of directors of CHOAM was offered to any house which did more than 500 million Solaris worth of trade through the Guild in a standard year. before we go too deep into that, one thing we didn't talk about was the implementation of the Solarian, like what its value is.
I forgot about that.
Because that's the Dune Encyclopedia. It dives in deep into that as well. But the point is that if we know that at least from Denis' movie, that it's 1.6 million and
1.4 and
1.4 and 62 1.4 million and 62 Solaris to like have this big ass ship just plop down to effectively, drop off some mail.
Yeah, send an email.
Yeah. 500 million is quite a bit of cash.
I've been trying to figure out what the price level is like in Dune. When they say they're taking out 10 billion Solaris a year, for instance, what are we talking? I mean, obviously he probably made that roughly equivalent to today's price level so that we would have an idea of the scale and dimension of it. But it does offer a lot of interesting questions because, for instance, how do you even compare? How do you do a purchasing power parity comparison of our currency to the Solaris if our basket of consumption is so vastly different? There's a lot of interesting economics questions in there that I won't bore you with, but you could have a whole conversation on that.
That's why we have you here, man. Like we're here to
nerd out.
We're here to just let you be as much of a fucking nerd as you want to. But before we dive,
even in the narrative, it's wildly inconsistent. Though.
Yeah.
While we're talking about membership into the board, I think one thing that's really important in the discussions that happen in the synod is that the emperor kind of neuters his power in terms of how much of CHOAM he owns, where he's only given 20% of the shares.
On paper.
Sure. The emperor has a lot of sway politically to, guide people into, voting on certain initiatives and everything. But he very well could have just been like 50% plus one.
Yeah.
And, stuck to that. I don't think the houses would have been super pleased about that. But, the fact that he limits himself initially at 20% is pretty important.
Yeah, it's depicted as a master stroke by a very wise emperor, very shrewd, and it is. It's really just the essence of the system, though. The whole system is designed to make it so that you don't have any group that's too advantaged over the other. It would make it so that it's designed to kind of have a checks and balance inherently within it, so that the Landsraad checks CHOAM, checks the guild, checks the emperor, and vice versa, all of them checking each other. No group's allowed to gain dominance over the other. And so, yeah, the emperor had to basically forfeit some of his power. If he had the Sardaukar military legion, that probably could have steamrolled all the other great houses, unless they unified. So, but
sure.
I guess the narrative is that he had restraint, and by doing that, he was able to create this durable form of government.
To me, that read like it was a willing concession on his part. Like, yes, he was, quote unquote, entitled to a lot more than that, but he knew if he was going to get any kind of buy-in, he had to be a smaller entity in this organization.
Yeah. It was like a magnanimous gesture to the great houses, saying, come in, join this government, we'll make sure you're taken care of. And that's really what the whole system is about. It's just making sure that the great houses and everyone in power is taken care of. No one gets left out. The structure of CHOAM and its directorships go to that directly. So the emperor starts out with 20%. He, over time, will grow his holdings to 25, 30. I think at the time of Paul, or in 10,141, I think he's at like 35% or so.
Yeah, it's 35% because after Paul ascends the Golden Lion throne, the encyclopedia says he has like 38.5%. So that leads us to believe that House Atreides had 3.5%.
Yeah, whatever it is, it puts Paul over the top, so he definitely has more than 51%. That's straight from the book, I'm pretty sure.
It was whenever in Paul's jihad, or whatever like a planet they take over in their jihad, like all of those shares just go to Paul. So he's just taking it over quite literally in that manner.
Yeah, he just goes absorbing the great houses, taking their shares. And I think even his priesthood has some of the shares too. So everyone's got a piece after the jihad.
He's really big on mergers and acquisitions.
Murders and executions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So CHOAM, as it starts out, Emperor doesn't have much power, but he only has a plurality. But if he can usually reunite 50% if he just gets some of the house's minors and maybe peel off one or two of the gray houses. So he effectively can exercise control, but not on an absolute basis. He still needs to get some buy-in from his shareholders. His shareholders are the great houses at that time, but a great house could also ascend into a CHOAM directorship by conducting a lot of commerce. So the key to understanding what a great house and a minor house, the distinction between the two, is merely access to interplanetary trade. That's pretty much the name of the game. So if you're a house's minor, you're kind of a planetary gentry, you're planet bound. You have your commerce, you have your commercial operations organized under your house, but you will almost never access international trade lanes. You're only pretty much you're limited to the domestic market. Only great houses have the ability to trade between planets.
I think the encyclopedia says something to the extent of that there were like two or three houses minor conducting like planet bound trade on Arrakis, whereas the Harkonnens were doing all of the spice exporting, but the Harkonnens didn't really care so much about trade on Arrakeen.
Yeah, they didn't. You're right. Yeah, but there is a lot of commerce. There's a lot of domestic commerce on Arrakis, for instance. You have a lot of trade. You have trade between the sieges and the different villages and the garrison towns. You have still suits, for instance, that's manufactured in the sieges, but also in the garrison towns where they're of inferior quality. You have different, sand snorkels, all sorts of different, products that are local. But yeah, I mean, one of the things though that I just, as an aside, I'm just wondering if they import water to Arrakis. I've been thinking about that for years. Because you got deadheading, in the Highliner.
Yeah.
You're taking spice out, but what are you bringing in to Arrakis? Maybe equipment, but not much. So you got a big deadhead. Why would you not bring in water? Anyway, whatever.
I don't know. I feel like you would have to bring in a shit ton of like steel and other metals to replace the siding of all of these harvesters that's just getting obliterated by the winds.
That's true. Yeah.
And not to mention the ones that get eaten.
Yeah.
The worm always comes.
Yeah. Lose a factory. Yeah. Yeah. Supposedly, I suppose people are they're probably importing new equipment and maintenance parts. Depreciation is probably terrible. But
water on Arrakis, I'll chase this rabbit just a little bit, but water on Arrakis seems like one of the things that would likely be controlled versus just something that people can import. I'm gonna say freely in quotes. But any kind of importation of water would be something that is like under heavy control.
Yeah, first of all importations are going to be under control or heavy control, just by the virtue of the fact that it's all through CHOAM and the guild. But also, we know that there is regulation of the water trade in the dinner party. We have the Souks, the guy who I think he turns out to be a Harkonnen agent. He's a Souk. They call him Souk after the water sellers.
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but I know you're talking about.
So we know that there's some water tycoon at the dinner party, basically. So we know that there's probably some heavy concentration in the domestic water market, which makes sense. Yeah. So you probably don't have unfettered commerce. In general, you don't. That's kind of the whole point of the Dune universe is you can't you have to go through the guild. The guild has control over this rent yielding asset, extremely valuable and scarce. So that makes it so that there's this choke point that the powerful can go and exert control over all of the economy. So there is no real, true, free market in Dune.
Let's say, hey, you own this planet, or you're in control of this planet, and we can use our humble Pundi rice as an example. You trade a shit ton of Pundi rice, you get a directorship in CHOAM. What happens then? Congrats, you made it.
You made it. Yeah, you did. You really did. Once you get into that, it's very difficult to fall. That's kind of one of the things that a lot of people that work in, the economics of social mobility and sociologists are pointing to in the United States is, the dynamism of our society is lacking because not just because there's not a lot of upward mobility, but also because there's not a lot of downward mobility. Once you make it to an upper echelon of society, it's very difficult for you to screw up and get sent back down to a lower class, even though you probably, there are a lot of instances where that should be happening right now, so.
Well, if you fuck up too bad, the government will just bail you out.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the same thing here is you get the other houses that just bail you out basically. So if your trade levels fall below the threshold, you still get to share in the profit sharing agreement. So in the profit sharing agreement, it resembles Major League Baseball a lot. You have a profit sharing. You obviously have individual revenue streams for the different great houses, which would be the baseball teams in this analogy. But you also have revenue sharing from the different contracts and league-wide in revenue sources. So media rights, for instance, they all share, even if it's a crappy team that invests nothing in their players and they lose pretty much every game. Same thing with the great houses. They can fall from grace. They can be completely fall in hard times, but they're never going to lose their position in the fa for luch. So that's an important thing that incentivizes a lot of great houses and anneals their support to the system because they can there is no possibility of a disruptor. There's no possibility of mobility and that helplessness is what they rely on. So
I think it's mentioned that they can't fall below 1%, like revenue.
It's one share.
One share, excuse me. Yeah. So even one share.
If you retained 1%, like if you just fucked up it completely and still retained 1%, like you're just living on interest at that point.
Yeah, and apparently you can probably claw your way back up. It's a substantial revenue source. It's nothing to sneeze at. So once a house makes it into the directorship, into the board of directors, it really has cemented its status. You can have some really dumbass fail son heirs, and even they can't fuck it up to get you kicked out. So.
That's what they're all aiming for. Sounds like.
Yeah. There's a lot of that going around, but that's basically the board of directors structure. It's kind of unclear, but there's an actual board of directors in CHOAM.
That's where you live, correct?
That's where I live. Yeah. I don't do much. It's pretty easy having a monopoly. It's pretty much sit around shit posting on Blue Sky all day. Yeah. So you can be a shareholder in CHOAM but not have an actual directorship, at least as I understand it. But as far as I understand, so the Atreides, for instance, they gained an actual CHOAM directorship, whereas they were shareholders before and then they became a director. Am I wrong on this?
No, I think you're right, because I think them taking over Arrakis is what led them to the directorship,
right?
Because their trade went above that threshold at that point,
right?
Well, you can only sell so much Pundi rice.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that actually, because I think the Pundi rice, I was reading through this in the encyclopedia, and it does say that the Pundi rice is pretty much for domestic consumption, which is pretty interesting. And that's in general what the implication is around the Atreides, is that they don't dabble much in interplanetary commerce. They pretty much stick to their own planet and don't get involved in a lot of these power politics. And it's only when the emperor comes and asks Leto to take over the fiefdom, that's when they are forced pretty much to go and play the great game. But
And I think that fits, that kind of falls in lines with Leto's personality as we know it.
right, yeah. So the punny rice is mainly for the domestic market, but they did bring some to Arrakis. So maybe there's a more substantial import-export market after Paul's ascension.
So a little bit ago, we mentioned the Solari, and I think it's obviously important enough to that the encyclopedia devoted a whole section on the monetary system within the Imperium, and how it is, it's not tied to any kind of like gold standard or any kind of material standard, even though I think that's what they initially had thought about during the Synod. They tried to explore that. They eventually led to a fairly complicated, table of prices, basically, to determine the value of the Solari.
Yeah, this is the essence of it all.
Yeah.
I should say, I think that the chapter gets a lot of things wrong. It's not the author's fault. They're going into more advanced monetary economics, and, I'm not even that great at that. I'm more of a microeconomist, so, I'm going to screw up here. But there are some things that it gets wrong. But it's a great discussion because it helps to illuminate the mechanics of the economy in the Imperium. So in the Imperium, as I mentioned before, you don't have a free market. You don't have, in a free market, the defining feature, I guess you could say, is a price system. That the prices are what reflect the information on scarcity. This is, pundy rice is in scarcity. There was bad harvest, whereas spice is in abundance. There was a great harvest. Prices adjust to say, pundy rice, quoted in terms of spice, is going to go up in price and vice versa, right? You don't have a price system, though, in the Imperium. You don't have a free floating price system. You don't have prices that are set, that are determined in equilibrium in how in the machinations of the market. You have instead CHOAM and the Guild really exercising a command and control economy. So, but we have to distinguish between the domestic and international markets. So domestically, CHOAM may not have very much control over prices and quantities domestically, but at least in the interplanetary economy, CHOAM would theoretically be setting prices, buying and selling, setting prices, and setting quantities and quotas as well. Basically a command and control economy. Kind of like, in a way, they're kind of like the Soviet Central Planning Agency.
Mm-hmm.
So they're telling everyone, but this is also where we run into some difficulties, where if we take the economic logic, the a priori economics logic to its conclusion, we run into some of these unknown questions that we can't really resolve. So, for instance, I mentioned this just before, but is there a price system? Is there a free market in the domestic market? So when you have entrepreneurs growing pundy rice and selling it in the market, does CHOAM or any of these, these market regulators, do they get involved in that? Or is it only when it's interplanetary? Because I can't think of what leverage CHOAM or any of the other institutions in the Imperium, what leverage they would have to try and command and control an economy on a specific planet.
Yeah, I'm going to have to. This is just me talking out of my ass here, but I would have to say, the simple answer is probably correct here, in that no, they don't. They don't concern themselves with domestic matters. It only gets to, they only care about it once it gets to the point of interplanetary, because that's why you have, dukes and barons and, the people who lead the planet. They would be concerned with all that, sure. But if someone like the entrepreneur that you mentioned, if they have this product or this service or whatever that gets big enough to where it has the scale to be an interplanetary product or service, sure, then that's when CHOAM can get involved and start doing their thing to regulate prices on the interplanetary market. But before that, no, I don't think they even care about it.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. And I think that what ties it all together is I just don't think that I think that there's a command and control economy at the planetary and local level. I think that the great houses exert control over their economies and probably plan them extensively. We don't know that. We don't get a lot of detail on that, but I think that's a safe assumption, because otherwise you would have a very confused price system and economic system where you would have, a lot of surpluses and deficits at a planet level, for international products, but not so much for domestic products. And I mean, it would be, I mean, I guess you could work it out, but it would not be, I mean, I guess in the end, no one really cares about, the subjects. It's only about whether or not the great houses are getting what they need. So, yeah.
Yeah, and gosh, I hate using this term, but there is some kind of trickle down
Yeah.
you could think of in this system where what's good for the people of the planet could be, again, if it's scalable, good for other planets. So it would drive, or it would at least lend to that incentive for people to not, or for people to have that entrepreneurial spirit, I guess.
And it will definitely make sure that everyone rises equally.
Oh, sure. No, absolutely not.
Wait, you mean the rich don't just get richer and everyone else just gets fucked over all the time?
Yeah. Those kind of feel-good stories only happen in the Dune universe, Yeah. So you get this situation where you might get, a different domestic regime, economic regime. But just like we could actually take the analogy of the Soviet Union a little bit farther, where you would have within the Soviet Union a planned economy, and then you would also have exporting partners. So the Soviet Union traded with Cuba, for instance. They would trade, I think, wheat, and then Cuba would trade back rum, molasses, and stuff like that, sugar. So you would have, in that sense, kind of a barter system, But really, if you look at, if you look and read a lot of monetary economics, you'll see that, that's really what a currency is in the end. When you're quoting prices internationally, you're really quoting in terms of just, what is one product in terms of the other. I didn't explain that very well, but what I'm trying to say is basically
it kind of all comes down to that supply and demand curve that we learn in Econ 101.
Right. So the Dune Encyclopedia, what it says is that there is a monetary authority that I think it's the guild actually, that determines this exchange rate. Now, this is where I think it does get into a little bit. I think it misses a few important points, which is that.
Hold up, before you go diving in, are you talking about the 25-year review of like
100-year?
Yeah.
The 100-year thing is the redistribution of CHOAM.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, there's the
shares.
Redistribution of shares, and then there's also
there's a 25-year financial review by the Guild, the Emperor, the Landsraad, all collectively reviewing market history.
Right.
To look at prices and then do some adjustments. But the encyclopedia, the next sentence says, none of these last more than 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I love those little parenthetical comments in the encyclopedia. Yeah. So that's the basic idea, is that some monetary authority gets together and sets. Now this is where I'm saying a more precise understanding of monetary economics would have helped this author, because what they're essentially saying is the guild gets together and sets prices. Not that they're setting, you can't set, you can set an exchange rate, but, they're essentially setting the price. They're saying that, 20 tons of melange is equivalent to 30 barrels of whale semen.
It's a good exchange rate.
Yeah. I don't know if I wouldn't make that trade, I don't think. So that's what they're saying. The author of that entry doesn't quite realize it, but that's really what they're saying, is that, and I think that they're right in that sense, that it has to be this way. You couldn't have a free floating price system. You would need to have a command and control economy. You would need CHOAM to be there to set prices, and domestically, the great houses to collaborate and collude and set prices domestically as well. So that's what that, I mean, but you can, I mean, the encyclopedia says that the guild resisted having any explicit commodity backing, so that they had instead like a basket of different commodities. They tried to use jewels and precious metals to back it. Mm-hmm. But in the end, what they didn't want to do, they were looking for something that had intrinsic value to back it, like the gold standard would have, but they didn't want to use spice because they didn't want to reveal the secret that this was so essential to them. On the other hand, what in reality, the currency is pretty much implicitly spice backed. I mean, that's what it, I mean, it is a fiat currency. That's the thing, is that they paint it as a currency that's backed by a weird commodity of baskets, that basket's changed, but really it's a fiat currency. It's printed by the Imperium, whatever the monetary authority is, and it has no formal backing. You can't go to Khitan and exchange your Solaris for spice or whale fur or whatever the commodity basket that they are talking about in there. Mm-hmm. So it's really not a fixed standard. It's not a fixed currency. It's a floating currency. Right. So, but it is spice backed in a way, because that's what all consumption is backed by. So in a way, you could say it is implicitly a spice-backed currency. It's on the spice standard. Yeah.
Yeah, because if that fails for whatever reason, then everything else stops.
Yeah.
All transport is halted.
Right. Well, just more than transport, just consumption in general. Although you would have domestic consumption, you'd have a lot of death, I guess. A lot of the elites would die from withdrawals.
Just as like a quick aside here, because you and I were joking about this when we were, planning the podcast and everything. But one of the things that kind of stuck in my mind when I was reading this section of the encyclopedia is just like the context of when this was written to economic events in our own timeline. Because the encyclopedia was published in 1984. And Nixon dropped the gold standard in 70?
Yeah, like 75 or 74, I think.
Point is that, it would have been fresh in the author's mind, how economically inclined this specific author for the century was. Even in my high school econ classes, they harped hard on how dropping the gold standard was, bad. So
I mean, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. I mean, that's funny. Did you go to school in Georgia by any chance?
No, I went to school in Florida at a private school. So
I went to school in Georgia, and they definitely were like not the happiest about it.
Yeah. Because this is like, especially in the South, there's a lot of these like John Birch Society types. Anyway, dropping the gold standard was not a bad thing. Someone like Milton Friedman would be totally fine with the gold standard as long as there's a constant growth of the money supply. That's basically what it's all about, is like how much you can enlarge the money supply. The rate of discovery of gold just provides a natural limit on how much you can grow the supply of dollars. So what it really just meant was, the government couldn't practice as much expansionary monetary policy. So, because it had to back up everything with gold. The same thing would have happened in the Imperium, but we don't know if they have any monetary policy, and I doubt they do. I doubt that they have fiscal or monetary policy to try and manipulate the Imperium markets, mostly because I don't think that they give a shit, but also because, I think that their manipulation is more just in terms of access to commerce and less so in terms of, interest rates, how that affects the monetary creation process. So if you had an explicitly spice-backed currency, that would limit the rate of expansion of the money supply in the Imperium. Why would that be important? I mean, if the productive capacity doesn't grow at the same rate as the money supply goes up, you would have inflation. But that really wouldn't. I just don't see that being very important in Imperium. So I doubt that they had a Federal Reserve who had a mandate to keep an eye on price levels. The only price level I'm sure that they cared about was the spice price level. So,
well, I mean, you bring up like the Federal Reserve, and I'm going to extend this to banking in general. If you want to bring this full circle, that is a position that the guild took over.
Yeah, well, sort of. The guild does have, it does fill a lot of banking, although we do have references to CHOAM and CHOAM financing. I think Ferrodin in Children of Dune, I forgot to look this up to confirm, but I'm pretty sure Ferrodin in Children of Dune, he talks about how he's trying to plot his way back to power, the Carino's way back to power, and he says, I need access to CHOAM financing. So CHOAM is providing some type of banking services. And again, this goes to the point of I don't make a very big distinction between the guild and CHOAM. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. So CHOAM, they're providing financing. If you're an entrepreneur, but this is a really interesting question, is who gets access to this financing? If you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to enlarge the status of your house and open new markets, I think that CHOAM and the guild, they're not a bank per se, in that they ration credit for non-pecuniary reasons. I guess banks do that too, but they're using their financing also as a political tool, in that you don't want to finance upstart houses, basically. That would disrupt the entire order and point of the Farfraluch's system. So offering financing is an interesting question of, there is a really interesting question, but kind of dumb, but just how do you have a financial market when you have prescience? But, I just don't see that really working out. The counterparty risk is pretty high if you're trading against Paul fucking Muad'Dib Atreides. So, I'm killing any order if I pick up the phone and the guy's name is Paul or some vaguely Fremen sounding name. It's funny how someone thought I was, just as an aside, someone thought I was an actual commodities trader when I started my account, so they blocked me. Anyway. I think that there are a lot of banking functions that the CHOAM is going to be, they'll do trade credits for sure. That's something that I would completely expect CHOAM to do is import-export financing, so just in terms of logistics and being able to make cash flows work, different trade financing organizations exist. The United States actually has a governmental, I forget what it's called, U.S. Export Corporation, I think it's called. Anyway, they provide trade financing, and that's what CHOAM would do. Finance receivables for different houses if they're if they're owed money, plug that hole in the time being until they can collect. Inventory purchases for trade, all that stuff would probably come with some type of financing package from CHOAM. But that would only be offered to a great house. So you can see how all of these financial and economic levers are really, these are not revenue maximizing actors. CHOAM is not a revenue maximizing company. It's a political entity, and it's really maximizing some other objective function, probably at political stability more than anything.
Yeah, no, I could see that. In our shared notes, there's a bullet point that I think this leads into pretty nicely. The political goals of CHOAM. What do you see those? You mentioned stability, which I think is absolutely correct. Where CHOAM seemed to me, at least from what I've read about the financial synod, to being like the compromise, and to bring the great houses together, where they could all profit, they could all be set for life if they get a directorship. But as an organization itself, or as a corporation, I think is a good way of thinking about it. Like, what do you think the corporation's political goals are?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, especially for an economist, because we in our simplistic stylized models, we just assume that a producer is a unified rational actor that can make decisions about prices and quantities and different decision variables in a way that it's very clean and easy, and you just look at what maximizes revenue. Whereas CHOAM is not really a unified actor. It's really a board of directors that is just a front for various competing factions and interests, or at least you could look at it that way. Another way to look at it is that CHOAM is actually a separate set of actors that, they bring in great houses for directorships, but there's really there's a professional management that exists and runs the corporation. So why am I basically the question is, when a great house gets a directorship, do they come in and start running the company, or are they more like a board of directors and there's an actual professional management that is separate from ownership, like in a typical corporation right now,
I feel like they
view
have
them
to
as board of directors.
Yeah, I feel like they have to vote on major initiatives and stuff like that. No one house can just get access and then just fuck shit up.
Yeah, that's what I get. I feel that way too. I feel like there's definitely a management and an ownership separation between those two functions. And the reason why I think that the support for that is that you hear that, there's a headquarters in Tupile, and no one really knows where that is. But the directors do. So if you're a great house director and you find out, I don't know, what do? They kill you after a directorship's over? I don't know. So to me, that suggests that there's management that's separate from the board of directors, and they run the day-to-day activities and not the great houses, which would make sense to me. Frankly, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, it's kind of it takes some getting used to just understanding economic production organized under a great house. It's kind of strange, but you're forced to think about it that way, because you have the Atreides going to Arrakis, for instance, and they've got their Sandmaster, they've got their whole infrastructure, different economic actors that they have and use. So it's kind of an interesting way of organizing production, basically.
I would, and this is me talking out of my ass. I would have to imagine that, whatever organization that CHOAM took on, and if you compare it to like the Great Houses organization, either CHOAM took some nods from how a successful Great House organizes their planetary economy, or the planetary economy is adjusted to fit into kind of like a flow into CHOAM.
I'm willing to bet it's much more the latter.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know though, because the overarching theme, at least of the encyclopedia, is that the Farfaluches was imposed from the top down. So I don't know. Maybe there is a good argument that CHOAM, Guild, all the people in the Synod basically designed the blueprint for all the different economies in the Imperium, and they just implemented it top down. Doesn't seem very feasible though, because we're talking about, this is an insane feat of administration just to get this whole Imperium united, much less design the economies. And I think that's why that there's a strong argument for what you guys were saying earlier, that the domestic economy is not controlled by the same forces as the interplanetary economy. And I think that's because, these feudal governments act as kind of like a franchisee, makes it a lot easier. Instead of operating your own Chick-fil-A, sell it to a franchisee. They run all that stuff, send you some tribute. And that's a lot.
Look, man, as long as I can get my nuggets, that's all that matters.
The great houses get their chicken nuggets. Everyone's happy.
No, I think that's a good point, because the encyclopedia does go to pretty good lengths to distinguish between feudal and non-feudal planets. Yeah. And even those that live on like the cusp of like, okay, this is a planet that's technically inside the Imperium, but they have a lot of neighbors that aren't. And those are the ones that, cause problems or that we have to, pay special attention to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it says that they're the least influential or the least prosperous. I think something like that. Yeah, it's funny to think about diversity and the types of governance, because we kind of get a limited picture of just great houses, and we assume that they all have some type of, aristocratic, hereditary type of governance structure, but we don't really know. And frankly, it doesn't make a lot of sense for you. I don't know. I mean, look, there's a lot of studying of family-based or family corporations and family businesses, since it's such a common way of organizing production in developing countries, for instance, as well as in developed countries. But they work well. Here's the thing: is that these types of institutions that are kin-based, they work well in when other institutions are weak. So like the rule of law, for instance, if you can't count on a court system to settle contracts and everything, either you submit to some type of voluntary authority like a mafia, or you can rely on other institutions such as kin, blood relation. And so you might see that if you have weak institutions that can't guarantee the easy execution of commerce. But you also have this problem of, like, who is your heir? Are they any good? Are they beast or are they fade? And does the emperor even approve my heir? Because that's something that was the prerogative of the emperor to approve that. So, these are not exactly the most efficient economic units, but they're not meant to be either. They're meant to just insist power, basically. So, there's another political agenda that's driving all of this, not revenue. CHOAM is not a revenue maximizing corporation. It is in the sense that, it probably earns a monopoly profit. In other words, if all of these houses were to compete without the cartel, they would make less money together. So it's not that they're losing money by going into the CHOAM cartel. It's just that they're probably not making as much as if they would if CHOAM were strictly a profit maximizing entity. But then again, they probably don't want that either. Like I said, you don't want to finance upstart houses, for instance. So if CHOAM's offering financing, they would have to be very careful to not finance the competition of these great houses. So
yeah, or the new house would have to have something that is unique in the trade system.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just imagining a bunch of like mafiosos in like giant suits and stuff, just all sitting around on a Highliner.
Yeah. Just giant fish-based mafiosos. Yeah.
Okay, but that's actually an interesting point.
All with New Jersey accents, by the way.
Yeah, just like that's Christopher Walken. That was meant to be. That's why it has the accent. Yeah. I wanted, before I forget about that, because it's actually a really good segue into what this is all about. CHOAM is all about, because if you didn't have CHOAM, in a way, you would have a lot of mafiosi. So the way that CHOAM is set up is it's a cartel, right? It's just like any other, like, De Beers, the Diamond Cartel, or, AMD, the lysine cartel, obviously the famous drug cartels. These are all producers that join up into a cartel in order to not compete in, ruinous competition. They can all get together, set a single price as if they were a monopoly entity, and then everyone abides by those production quotas, because if they were all competing, they would produce more in order, and that would push down the price, which is not good for the cartel. So they want to keep everyone from competing. All right. Basic. It's pretty vanilla and not really going into anything crazy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the thing where this comes in here is that CHOAM is a cartel, and it has to make sure that everyone abides by the cartel. So if you are an upstart drug producer and you try selling outside of the cartel's drug lanes, for instance, you're going to find that you get bushwhacked real quick. If you try to sell outside of OPEC, like Kuwait did, you end up getting invaded by Saddam Hussein. So, there's a punishment always in terms of these cartels. It's the only way to make it work, because there would otherwise be a fantastic incentive to defect. The price is so high that if you can just undercut it just by a little bit, you can basically take the whole market from your cartel members, which would piss them off, obviously. But that's why you have these types of trigger strategies where, if someone breaks the cartel, you can punish them. This takes the form of, for instance, if two companies are trying to compete or trying to collude, one breaks the agreement, then the other would say, we're going to drop down to the lowest price we possibly could just to punish you. It doesn't even matter that it's going to hurt us. This is the only way to keep the cartel alive. CHOAM has to do the same thing, in that any type of interplanetary commerce outside of CHOAM and the guild would be an immediate direct threat to them, because obviously the guild would be freaking out because they need that monopoly on space travel, and they'll do anything to keep it. I'm sure that they would there's a sabotage wing, right, in the guild. So they go around and sabotage the Ixians or whatever. Yeah. So CHOAM, any type of commerce that occurs outside of CHOAM would require a prompt smackdown in order to keep the cartel together. Otherwise, you would have too great of an incentive for people to, let me paint this in a more concrete example. Let's say you're the Atreides on Caladan. You have some amazing pundy rice that you want to bring to the inner space market. So you have to go through CHOAM, but CHOAM says, yeah, your pundy rice, we're only going to give you 100 tons of melange for every 1,000 tons of pundy rice or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You say, no, that's not a great price. I could do a lot better if I was doing it myself. I don't need to go through transact with CHOAM, who are only going to buy for this much. If I could bring it directly to the market, cut out the middleman, then I could make a lot more money. So that's a pretty simple way of illustrating that, like CHOAM, you need these trigger strategies to punish defectors. If you have great houses going at it on their own, you have absolute chaos. The whole system comes toppling down. So the guild and CHOAM are really in league to stop that. Anyone trying to have an interstellar transportation startup, I'm assuming that the guild would send assassins, pretty much stop at nothing to stop you from doing that. Aside from cutting off all financing, I can't imagine, obviously if you're a steersman, that makes it, that's a great bank loan officer. If you have a you have a full steersman to be able to presciently say, you're going to use this loan to go buy cocaine, so they know.
Space cocaine.
Yeah. Space cocaine.
Samuda.
So they know if you're going to, they pretty much know if someone's mounting some type of challenge to their monopoly. And so you will have piracy and smuggling. That exists. We know that. But it would be something that would have to be very clandestine. And I'm guessing that great houses would have to go through extreme lengths to not be associated with that, because I can only assume that CHOAM would have very severe punishment, maybe even removal and stripping them of directorships and shares.
I would imagine it would be very similar to like if you slighted the guild in any way. Say you engaged in combat on a Highliner or whatever.
Yeah.
Where the guild then just drops you completely. CHOAM would also drop you and cut you off completely from any kind of commerce and basically leave you back on your single planet to die.
Yeah. And you made it's important that CHOAM and the guild both act in tandem. Yeah. They have to act in tandem, which is why it makes so little distinction between the two. They're pretty much unified and allied.
The Venn diagram is very nearly a complete circle.
Because CHOAM has no juice unless they have the guild to back them up. If the guild says, yeah, if you want to trade outside of CHOAM, just come on the Highliner and bring enough spice and we'll do anything for you. then that would undermine CHOAM's leverage and their ability to squeeze all the other great houses. And if CHOAM were saying, yeah, we'll build a Highliner and take you guys around, you don't need the guild, we'll pay, just pay us a little extra, then the guild would be pretty much out, shit out of luck. So both of these institutions, they recognize they need each other, and they cover each other. They act in tandem, and they've got each other's backs. It's the only way to make their threats credible, So
Yeah.
those are pretty much the same. But
So you mentioned different markets. We know from reading the books that there is effectively a sanctioned black market off Arrakis, like smuggling for spice. How do you think that works with CHOAM and the so I'm going to say CHOAM / the guild here. How does that fit into this whole model of the cartel example that you gave?
yeah, the key here would be the price system. If there's a free floating price system, then you don't really need smugglers. I mean, unless there's some other restraint to trade that keeps product from reaching the market. But in general, if prices can equilibrate, they can adjust to equilibrate the market, then, you wouldn't have, so for instance, if you had, if you have gray market smugglers for Oxycontin, if heroin is cheap enough, you don't really have much of a market for Oxycontin. So the prices are what, let me just start over. All right. So basically,
That's all good.
all right. The only way that smuggling and all of these other contraband, gray or black market operations, the only way that they're financially worthwhile is if the price system makes it so that there's some type of deficit. So in other words, the price of spice is artificially low. CHOAM is keeping it low, or artificially high, excuse me. CHOAM is keeping it high, restricting supply. And so then smugglers would see an opportunity to go mine some spice, sell it on the open market at the market, whatever price CHOAM sets, but minus 1 cent, just undercut them just slightly, and you can pretty much win the market. So that smuggling only exists if the prices if the prices don't reflect the relative scarcity of these commodities. So if CHOAM isn't manipulating the prices and the guild isn't manipulating the prices, there's really no incentive for smugglers to happen. Just like, if we were to legalizing marijuana has eliminated a lot of the smuggling operations that existed in the cannabis industry and make it pretty much legitimate. So there's the same sort of thing there. It's got to be the price system is creating this incentive. And it's because CHOAM operates this monopoly and the prices do not reflect relative scarcity. So there is some type of arbitrage or untapped profit opportunity. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. In my head, I was just thinking about, I was trying to put myself in the time of Frank Herbert as he was writing these books. I'm 34, so these were well before my years. I wonder what kind of analogies he would have been drawing on as he was writing these books.
I mean, it's the 60s, man.
But I think that there's also a strong argument that it was more East India Company. Okay, I should make a small detour and just say that a lot of CHOAM's early history, at least as the encyclopedia delineates it, a lot of it is based on imperial expansion. So CHOAM really works, was maybe the vehicle whereby all of these systems, the Imperium expanded, conquered new worlds, opened up new markets, kind of a neo-colonial expansion of territory. CHOAM was the vanguard in all of this.
Yeah, the encyclopedia says something to the effect of over the first 500 years of CHOAM's existence, trade expands to every known planet in the universe or something like that. It's crazy fast how quickly trade just expands.
Yeah, and that they say that the that it kind of, the system relied on that expansion, which is kind of it's really a Marxian economic argument that is made by by more heterodox economists, or by more unorthodox economists. I'm not going to go into that just because I don't really know much about it, but there's some interesting Marxist and Marxian economics viewpoints and different bits of wisdom that can shed light on Dune. So there's that. But yeah, they say that basically that expansion was what really helped to cement a lot of the economic system, because it helped to opening up new markets, and all that just kind of helped to juice the economic returns of the time, and it just made it a lot easier for everyone to accept the system, I suppose. Yeah. But I think that if CHOAM was the driving impetus, then you could say that East India Company is a pretty good analogy there. I'm not so sure. I'm not really a historian on this, but I'm not at all. But I don't know if I know a lot of people say that East India Company, there was something inherently colonial about it. I couldn't say that for sure. I don't know.
There was. I mean, there, in the sense that they had a charter from the English government to basically just expand, and they had their own military force, and they
were effectively their own government within England.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there are strong analogies there. In everything that I've read, and I'm not a historian, I'm just a fan of history. And that is probably the strongest tie that I could draw.
Got to go listen to Dan Carlin's episodes on the East India Company. Well,
okay, so this is circling back to a point we made a while back, but we're talking about kind of the overall political makeup and how the each individual planets kind of interact with the Imperium, like the government of the Imperium. What it reminded me of was the Persian Empire, where a vast empire containing many different conflicting cultures, even. But what they, at least from everything that I've read and listened to, it operated basically on a like, you can do your own thing. You can do your own, have your own set of rules. You can have your own religion and, government practices and everything, but you are beholden to the Persian Empire. You report up to this overarching thing. So if we want to draw a historical analogy to the way that the Imperium was set up, I think that's a pretty good one.
The only thing, though, is that East India Company having an army, that makes it a really great analogy. But the thing is CHOAM, we don't know anything about whether or not they have an army. And in fact, one of the things that has been bothering me was just thinking, like, why doesn't CHOAM have atomics, Or the guild, for that matter. And I think it kind of clicked where I said, that would just create an imbalance. If CHOAM had nukes, then I think that the great houses, they might try to force out the great houses. And I think that just would be too destabilizing. I don't know if you guys have an opinion on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the question I was gonna kind of turn it back on you is, like, do they need them?
Yeah, I guess not. I mean,
it's in the great house's best interest to defend CHOAM should the emperor do something, or vice versa. If you have a great house attacking CHOAM, all the other great houses and the emperor with the Sardaukar would all then just dogpile that one. So it's almost like a combination of, mutually assured ascension and mutually assured destruction at the same time.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
And then as far as the guild is concerned, it's just, hey, we just move things. As long as you don't fuck with us, we're cool with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And commerce as a weapon is actually, I mean, they basically could enforce sanctions pretty much.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
They wouldn't even enforce sanctions. They would just literally neuter everything and cut you off entirely.
Well, and there's an end universe example of this where, the moving of military forces is, exorbitantly more expensive to houses than moving of commodities.
Yeah,
Because
Vladimir Harkonnen even goes so far as to say that the Arakeen attack cost him effectively the entirety of his profits from the 80 years of Harkonnen control over Arrakis, which is a fuckload of money.
I need to ask you guys this because I'm confused though. So, I mean, I assume that he brought his, well, maybe not, but I would presume that he brought his entire force, just like Leto did. You know, they pretty much moved to Arrakis. Did they not just spend, how did they get there in the first, like what money are they spending to actually get back and, you know, like moving back and forth from Arrakis? You know, like they're not spending 80 years.
you're talking about the Harkonnens or the Atreides?
I meant the Harkonnens, but anyone really. I'm just wondering, like, if it costs so much to transport your entire house to another planet, for instance, you know, like, where did they get the money to go back and forth in the first place?
Well, I think moving there for a warlike purpose was probably cheaper, but also, you know, we were talking about, I think that's where you see some of the financing, and then CHOAM has even more economic leverage because then they leverage the debts that are accrued by whatever major house for the purpose of moving military over that house to then ensure that they don't, you know, move to a planet, dominate it, acquire, you know, whatever shares in CHOAM from whoever they're attacking, and then turn on CHOAM. So
CHOAM is like the IMF, basically, with structural adjustment packages that they, if you try to borrow money from them, you've got austerity in your front. Yeah.
I mean, this is all just like me thinking rationally in my
well,
head.
that's the only thing. Yeah, we can just kind of reason. Yeah. So there's not a lot of detail, which is, I mean, that's what makes it fun, is we can kind of sit here and think what would make sense and what wouldn't.
That's why I love Dune. It leaves so much to the reader's imagination that you can just kind of come up with your own, hopefully, you know, logical explanations for things.
Yeah, and CHOAM requires a lot of that because we don't, I mean, you know, Frank doesn't really flesh out all of the economy in the Imperium. So we can only kind of get these little bits and pieces that can kind of give us an idea of, you know, like I'm reading through and I'm trying to get a sense of how big are highliners, how much cargo can they carry, you know, stuff like that. These little mundane details that have important implications for if you're going to analyze the economy of the Imperium. You know, I need to get a sense of the transportation costs. That's the biggest starting point, because that's what makes it the neo-feudal government, is that it's just too difficult to administer this huge territory. So you get these, you divide up in these fiefs.
I was going to say, Zach works for a logistics company, so he could probably help you out with that.
Well, then you know, though, that, like, you know, for instance, if, you know, if you have a choke point, if you have, you know, like just theories of constraints, if you have a bottleneck at the, you know, in terms of your navigators, you're going to want to increase your lot size and decrease your frequency and, you know, just basically stuff as much stuff in a highliner as possible. So that's what gives me, you know, that's what to me makes it logical that a highliner would be huge. I know that doesn't sound like much of, you know, like a lot of reasoning to come to a simple conclusion, but it's important because that's how we determine, you know, we can kind of get a sense of how does commerce and trade happen between these planets, you know, how often does it happen, you know?
And when I've thought about this, because I legit have thought about this because of my job, I always kind of get tripped up on the, okay, well, how many highliners do they have? You know, is this a supply problem or is this a demand problem that they're running into, or how do they, or, you know, if it's neither, how do they balance the two?
Well, they do say that highliners are very difficult to build, which makes sense, but that they're very durable and relatively easy to maintain, which is interesting. Or I don't know about the maintenance part. I do know that they're relatively durable. That would only increase the, you know, the minimum efficient scale of our guild. It would just make it so that the incumbency would just be even more valuable. Once you build all of your highliners, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to challenge you because you've got a durable fleet of very complex, difficult to build machines that you need. So
you need a lot of upfront capital.
A lot. Yeah, a lot.
Your Series A is going to go fucking wild.
Yeah, no, and that's actually what a lot of this finance would look like is more venture capital type. And I do wonder though how payment is made. So back in the day, venture capital, I worked a little bit in VC. The interest that the venture capitalist earns is called carried interest, and this goes back to sea voyages when the crew would carry a load, and then they would get 20% of the load as interest at the next port. That was their incentive, their skin in the game to make sure that it got delivered and not lost. And I'm wondering if this is the same thing that happens here. The guild gets some percentage of some kind of carried interest for carrying all of this stuff, or if they just get a flat fee. I wouldn't be able to say. That's more for the Navigator episode, but it's something interesting to contemplate.
Yeah, no, I don't even. I'm trying to think of like anything that would lend an answer to that, and I'm coming up with nothing.
I mean, the key would be the risk of it,
Yeah,
and especially the alignment of incentives. So the carried interest in these sea voyages was to align incentives so that you wouldn't have sea captains that would neglect their cargo since they had some skin in the game, I guess. So, but you probably wouldn't have as much of that incentive with the guild. So I don't know if you would need to incentivize them with carried interest. I don't know if they would even care. I don't know. Yeah, this is one where you have to really, it's kind of, you got to really dive deep there.
Well, I'm sure now that we've put it into the ether, Brian Herbert will write a whole book.
And I'll hate it.
Oh man, poor Brian. Yeah, Brian, if you're listening, go get some cognitive behavioral therapy, man. I'm sorry that you have to listen to this abuse every day.
So I want to turn kind of the conversation to what I view as the kind of the last chapter of CHOAM, which is how it existed under the God Emperor, or I guess maybe a better way of saying that is how it stopped existing under the God Emperor, or at least it had such diminished influence.
Yeah,
Leto's whole thing was the end of stagnation, and we've talked at great length about how CHOAM kind of was a big player in that stagnation in the Imperium.
Yeah, and I guess from just a functionalist standpoint, CHOAM doesn't really serve a purpose when Leto ascends to God Emperor. There's the Fafarluches doesn't really make a lot of sense. You have the reason why is you have Leto's peace. He establishes through an iron grip and his speaker army. He's able to clamp down and is able to consolidate his power and enforce a peace, Leto's peace, like a Pax Romana type thing. So you don't have the instability, which is what gave rise to the Fafarluches in the first place. So there's really not a purpose that CHOAM fulfills. And I think that's why it starts to go by the wayside well, first of all, the great powers start to lose their stature under Leto, right?
Right.
They start dropping out. A lot of them a lot of them, they depend on the melange trade. So obviously with the terraforming the diminishment of the spice cycle and lower yields, you just have, certain houses would probably see substantial drops in revenue and maybe even economic collapse. And so, you have this situation in which the great houses are declining, but that doesn't really create much instability or lack of peace because Leto is the Leviathan. He's the hegemon that is able to, establish his monopoly on violence and ensure that there are there's no violation of that sovereignty, basically. No usurpation by other actors that would create instability or would rock the peace, basically. So anyway, so CHOAM doesn't really have a purpose. There's no system to uphold. Mm-hmm. And because CHOAM was not a natural entity. It was very artificial. There's no one there to artificially prop it up anymore. The emperor, the guild are not there. They don't have any compelling interest in keeping CHOAM as the monopoly on interplanetary commerce. So in Leto too, you see the decline in CHOAM. I think it even ends up ceasing to exist at some point in God Emperor, or maybe that's later in Chapter House, I'm not sure. And it makes sense because you don't, well, even more so, it makes sense not just because there's no Fafaluches, but also because Leto doesn't particularly care about commercial efficiency at all, especially not interplanetary commercial efficiency. You know, I mean, the whole point of, well, not the whole point, but one of the big points of the Golden Path is to create, you know, these conditions where humanity is walled off. They don't travel much between planets. There is disconnection. I don't see why he would want CHOAM to create commerce between these different worlds if that's the whole point, is to cut off commerce. There's that. And there's also the fact that just, you know, like from year to, I mean, so Leto, sort of the point of Leto was to teach humanity that stability is, you know, it's a false dream. It's a false panacea. And I think that in a sense, Leto's neglect of CHOAM and the economic machinery of the Imperium is sort of an extension of his Golden Path philosophy, in that he's teaching humans that, yes, if there's a shortage of ink vine or whatever, you know, glow globes from year to year, that
there better not be a fucking shortage of glow globes. I'm so pissed off.
Yeah, there might. I can't vouch for.
Don't you put that out there?
Yeah, yeah. So the weird part about glow globes, speaking of which, is they're anaerobic bacteria. So, because we got into this debate, I don't know who it was on Blue Sky, but we were talking about, are glow globes, are they traded internationally? And if so, why are they must be expensive. And if that's the case, then do only great houses have glow globes to illuminate inside of their houses?
Well, you know, if we want to talk about, you know, what's canon and what's not, if you talk about the miniseries, they had what looks like very natural looking glow globes, or they just had to they're like glow sticks. They just had to shake them and they turned on.
Yeah. The encyclopedia says that they're anaerobic bacteria and that it comes from a specific planet, which if that's the case, then you could infer that they're probably pretty expensive. Anything that has to be shipped between planets is going to be necessarily expensive. So anything like that, anything that's not produced domestically, we can pretty much infer, which is, it's kind of crazy. I can't imagine. I mean, life has really got to suck in the Imperium. That's the point. I mean, consumption has got to be very low. So that's not, I mean, if people had an ability to revolt, that would be very bad. Luckily they don't for the great houses. So, but Leto is able to ensure this through his army and, you know, his various ways of concentrating his power. So, you know, any economic unrest only really serves his purpose, his golden plan, to just teach the humanity a lesson in its bones. And part of that lesson would be, you know, relying on the stability of commerce is a mistake. You know? So.
Yeah. And that was kind of like an underlying theme, or maybe even an overt theme of the scattering, was just to get people away from a centralized governance and, you know, to evolve on their own.
Yeah. 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 And I think that economic hardship was probably, you know, necessarily part of that. I think that just the fact, I mean, just cutting off interplanetary trade was enough to probably bring down living standards substantially. I've been trying to get in a sense of the Butlerian Jihad and how much that cut down living standards. I mean, if we were to completely ban any type of thinking machine, obviously depends on what our criteria for a thinking machine is. But if we were to ban them, I got to think that's like a 90% reduction in our living standards overnight, you know?
Sure.
Yeah. And I think that the only thing that really kept a lot of the prosperity of the Imperium going is the interplanetary trade. So if you get cut off from that, you know, you're going to be eating a lot of pundi rice, basically. I do think though that the tax system is an interesting point just to explore it real quickly, because I just feel like this is a slight difference between the middle age government that we are typically familiar with and the neo-feudal 10,141 government, is that you have an extensive administration apparently under Shaddam and Shaddam. And that's something that didn't really exist in the Middle Ages in these, like in the Holy Roman Empire. You didn't really have a sophisticated system of courts. And I think that one of the biggest things, the differences is that, instead of the different fiefs and vassals providing troops, they really just provide a levy or a tax of some sort instead of providing, a standing army, because Shaddam already has his Sardaukar, so he doesn't really need that. But it is interesting that he has this entire system of taxes and administration for something that, frankly, it grew out of the fact that it's too difficult to administer. So I think that is one thing that's slightly incoherent. And I would really find it interesting in Messiah if they could trace out what does the imperial bureaucracy and administration look like. And I think Messiah is a really good part. That's a really good place to explore that, because you have Stilgar as frustrated bureaucrat, from Nabe of the Bled to frustrated bureaucrat doing logistics computations and mentat work. So we could try and see, they could try and trace a little bit of how does, what is the imperial court? What are all those weirdos with the helmets and the chain, the ceremony change? What do they do?
Fair.
That's
a good point. Yeah.
Maybe they don't do anything. I mean, that is kind of the theme of this, is the Imperium is just rife with decadence and, just people getting fat and contributing nothing. So maybe they do contribute nothing. I don't know. But it's certainly something to take into account, because that rule of law is very important for all commerce. I think that people are starting to realize that now. So, it's you can try and take over you can try and co-opt and subvert institutions and everything, but to a certain extent, for commerce to just be able to flow, you need some type of objective rule of law. And I think that in that sense, the guild almost provides that, because they are really the most objective party in all this. They only care about the spice flowing. Everyone else has their own design. And so in a way, I mean, you could really say that the judges and the legal system, it really resides with the guild. In the end, they're the power. So
it all comes back to the guild. All right. Well, John, how do you feel? You feel good about CHOAM?
There's so much. And there's so much still to talk about, which is crazy.
I mean, there's a lot of topics about the economics of the Imperium that have nothing to do with CHOAM, so I haven't touched on them. But there's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's, from how the different, the architecture, for instance. I know this isn't strictly an economics topic, but like how the construction techniques and the urbanism is due to, laser cutters, for instance, that, a lot of the neo-brutalist architecture you see, that the large and imposing, it's probably from the laser cutters. But also you see, a tendency for certain regimes to go for large architecture and imposing structures, like Soviet brutalism. I'm going to have a chapter on that. I'm going to have a chapter on, the Fremen specifically. We're going to look at whether or not the Fremen were a socialist kibbutz, or if they were really just a more capitalist society. There's a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, frankly, I'm excited to read your book, man. This is going to be a really, really cool thing, and I love the work that you're doing.
Thank you. You guys too. I'm excited to come and talk about it on a podcast. That's fun.
We would love to have you back at some point. Maybe not going as in depth, but definitely find a few minutes of the movie to talk about and just kind of nerd out over those. So
peek behind the pod curtain is that we're starting our coverage of the second movie. So we're going to resume our minute by minute coverage here in the next month or two. Well, I would absolutely love to have you back on for a set of 5 or a set of 10, whatever you want, man.
5. We'll leave it to 5.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes down for the audience first, and then we'll make plans.
All right. Well, do you have anything that you want to plug before we wrap up?
No, I don't think that there is. I guess I would just give a small plug to my book, but it's nothing big. I'm just going to write a little bit about economics. It's pretty easy, economics of Dune, because I don't really need to have any, I don't need any extremely rigorous research or anything. So that's nice. But I think it'll be entertaining for people that have looked, especially because there's a lot going on in Dune that we're only seeing the surface of. And I think that if we use a little bit of economic principles to try and suss out a little bit of these details, we can get a bigger understanding of what's going on, and without making too many leaps, we can just use reasoning a little bit. We can try and trace out what the Imperium and what its composition looks like.
Oh man, like I said, I'm excited to read it. I love this shit. So this is right up my alley.
Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Well, John, you want to take us out with socials?
I will. Before I get into our socials, though, I do want to plug CHOAM Directors. On Blue Sky, he is also there. He is at choamdirector.com. If you don't follow him, first of all, what the fuck? Secondly,
best memes in the business, I gotta say.
Ooh, I don't know. That's fighting words, because the Atreides nuts might have some words for you.
Oh, that's fine.
Atreides, he and I DM each other all the time, telling each other when we got original content and whatnot.
But we are also on Blue Sky. You can find us there at duneminute.com. And if you're not on Blue Sky but you'd like to get in touch with us, the best way to do that is by email. You can just email duneminute@gmail.com, and we will respond to you as quickly. Well, maybe not as quickly, but we will respond to you whenever we get around to it. We have other things going on in our lives as well. But we'll be back whenever we publish the next summer school. All right, cool. Well, CHOAM Director, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute delight. I can't wait to have you back on.
Thank you, guys. I can't wait to come. I appreciate it.
We will see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.